Allow me to take your coat now.
Howdy. Is that loud enough to hear? Okay. First order of the business tonight. Who brought this filthy weather here?
I was here when I got here.
It's we don't like it and we pretend that we don't ever have it. So keep it secret, will you? Don't tell your friends about it. But yeah, we do occasionally get it. The first year that my wife and I moved here to the island, we rented a house from a local realtor, and maybe questionable values. We won't mention Mark Gross's name. And after he thoroughly questioned us, more like interrogated us about what we're doing here, what we plan to do here, why we thought we could make it here on the island, he decided we might be okay islanders, and he rented us a place and charged us about 4 times what we figured something that size was worth. Welcome to the island. You know, that's the way it is. People have been putting up with this for a long time. So we moved in, and almost immediately there's a freeze. The very first winter, a freeze. And of course, the pipes. And I crawled out of the house, which was easy to do because there's a lot of airspace, and of course the wind's blowing like Dickens right onto it from the north naturally. And I found the offending pipe, and it was easy because there was zero insulation on it. Well, I borrowed a hairdryer, and I got as many extension cords as I could locate the whole neighborhood, and I crawled under the house, and I swore, and I kept heating that pipe, PVC, so you have to be careful, with this hairdryer, and finally, I can hear the water start to flow. Well, we got it. It began to flow. So then we decided, well, we're going to have to drip the pipes, obviously. What else are we going to do? I mean, there is no insulation. But it seemed like everybody in town decided they'd have to drip their pipes in. And the water system at the time was inadequate, and it went dry. The pressure ran out, so here we are again. And I thought, why do people come here? But I never did ask the question that we're going to get answered tonight. How did they come here? But before we launch into this lecture tonight, 2 things. One, we're conducting our annual meeting. And President of PAPHA, and therefore the museum, Nancy Donnelly, is going to take over for just a moment. She's going to read you some stuff from her notes, and then you're going to vote to approve everything that we did. At that now, before we start, I want to swear you all in as members. Raise your right hand. Right hand. Right hand. I solemnly swear that I will be a member of PAPHA.
I solemnly swear that I will be a member of PAPHA.
Good. We will collect your money as you leave. Nancy Donnelly.
Lecture series for this winter
This was, as you know, and still is an island, a real island. But there was no road, and there was no ferry. So, we're going to have an interesting talk tonight. Now, the man who was going to his rescue says his name is Greg Smith. That sounds like an alias to me, doesn't it? He could have come up with a better one than that. And I asked him this evening, please let me have your bio so I can introduce you. Here's the object lesson. He said, nah, I'm not going to give you a bio, just say what you want. You'll be sorry. Greg was educated. It'll be hard to believe when you begin to hear him talk, but he was educated. From what we can turn up, first he went to Yale, and shortly after that to jail. He was arrested for picketing an SPCA meeting and was subsequently put in jail for dislike of cats. In the ensuing melee, he finally was released, but was sentenced to life in Port Aransas. When he walks up here, you will notice that he has a slight limp. That's the chip that's embedded in his ankle so we can always keep up with what he is. Are you sorry yet, Greg? Greg also owns the RV cabin out on the hill that I think maybe some of you live. Anybody? Well, it's not much of a stacked crowd. I figured he really, solve the crowd. And is descendant of the first ranching family of Mustang Island and PAPHA Island, the Dunns. In fact, his grandfather had the temerity, much like Greg, to give himself the title of the Duke of PAPHA Island. Well, that's pretty cool when you think about it, right? So, what's the next step up from Duke? Anybody know? Earl. So I'm going to, tonight, introduce you to Greg Smith, the Earl of Port Aransas.
Thank you for that fine introduction, Greg. Now, what you didn't mention about my little issue with the law was not only my dislike for cats, but I was overly fond of dogs. So we don't want to mention that on there. Did we dim the lights a little bit? Anybody? And thank you for that introduction. I've never been called an Earl. I've been called a Jester a lot. Not an Earl. Can everybody hear me okay? So, first I'd like to thank Bill Behrens and a gentleman that's not here tonight, Mark Creighton. These are two stalwarts of the museum. They've got a hand in this presentation that I'm about to do, so I want to make sure. And then Rick and Cameron, they're always great. And my right-hand man in presentations, Jim Burton, with his lovely wife Bonnie, is here. He's my computer guru. And anybody at the park, we know how important Jim is to our computer system out there. But we were asked, Rick brought up a topic, and I've lectured on other topics before, but this is one of an interest to me in going back in history, is how we got to the island and over time. And I'm going to talk both about Mustang and pottery, since my family history is a little late here on Mustang Island, but on pottery, they got there in the 1860s. So I've got a little bit more knowledge on that. Okay, the first people on the island were the Indians. And the Indians arrived in North America, depending on what you read, about 10,000 years ago. And they got here, but there was one issue about getting to the island. The island didn't exist. Richard Watson, if he's here, our geologist, The island is about 4,000 years old. That's both Mustang and Padre. That at the end of the last glacial time, the sea was about 50 miles west of here. And then as the glaciers melted and the water shoreline filled up about 20,000 years ago and stabilized, then the Barrier Islands started to form when the islands came. So nobody got here before 4,000 years ago, which is just a fraction of a second in geologic time. And the folks that came here were first the Karankawa Indians, which they ranged from about the southern portion or northern portion of Padre on up to the Galveston area. And this tribe was different than most Indians, or different than all. Nobody really liked them. There were cannibals on there. They didn't have horses. They traveled in dugout canoes. So this is how they made it up and down the island. They were nomadic. They didn't have any permanent camps, but they would go back on the backside of the island. We're so beach-oriented, but both Mustang and Padre, they're shell middens out there where they'd have their camps and live on shells. And sometimes of the year they'd go across the bay and camp on the other side of the bay. So they worked both sides on there. They were hunters and gatherers. That they had bows that were about as tall as we are. And one unique thing about them, besides liking flesh, human flesh that is they talked in grunts and whistles. So they had a language that was very unique to North America. There's some corollaries in Africa, but not in North America. So there's some theories and hypotheses that they may have had some African origins with it. And just south in Padre Island, there was another tribe of Indians called the Malachites. Anybody that goes down the National Seashore, that's what the visitor center is named after. And the Malachites, it was a little easier to get to Padre. The nemesis of the Karankawas is they tackled Jean Lafitte, the pirate. He came to Galveston and he ran up and down the coast before settlement on there, and they made the mistake of killing a couple of his pirates. And then he went out and basically wiped out that band of Karankawas. And the last Karankawa known died in the 1860s. The tribe no longer exists. So they got over to the island in the dugout canoe. So for 4,000 years, that's how you got to the island. But the Malachites on Padre Island, they had a ford. They went across the Laguna Madre on there. And it was relatively shallow. It was knee-deep at the deepest point, about 2 miles long, but it was only about a half a mile, and the rest of the time it was ankle-deep. And as people settled the area, they knew about the ford, and they called it the Stake Road. You see these stakes. And there was a hard sand bottom there. Zachary Taylor's army looked at using that, and when they were encamped in Corpus, they needed to get down to the valley. So they thought about going across to Padre Island, going down there, and they checked out the road, and it looked okay. But on either, the reason it's staked, on either side, they're logs. And I can remember my mom telling us when we were small children, she had one of her favorite horses on there. And if you got into the bogs, the animals would founder in there and lost the horse in that bog. So you always had to make sure driving your cattle that you kept within the stakes. So we always grew up as a kid with this fear of quicksand. And that's the word that we use, not a bog, but a quicksand. So as a young child, you know, uh-oh, you're going to go in the quicksand. So you had to stay within the ford with it. And this is the location of it. Here's the current causeway today. Now, this is Yorktown Road for you all that are familiar with it. And this is about where it came across the island. The deep portion of the water was right in here. And from this point on, it was shallow. This is the Intercoastal Waterway. It didn't come into being until 1948. And so when you were moving cattle to Pottery or Mustang Island, there were 2 routes to go, and this was one of the 2 routes to go. So even if you were going up to Mustang, you brought them across here. And also growing up, we had a set of pins. So they would drive the cattle across over here, go across Flower Bluff, and hold the cattle in those pins. And this took place until 1950, and then truck the cattle out. Okay, on the Mustang side, this is how you got the cattle across here. This is the ship channel right here. This is the Lydian. This is Port Aransas. This is something that most people don't know. The ship channel is a dredge channel. This was called Turtle Cove, and these were mud flats. You could literally walk across through most of history from Mustang Island to Harbor Island. So a drive would start here. That we have the books in the museum. Guthrie Ford, who is unable to make it, written part of the Mercer Logs, he talks about this. But they would drive the cattle across here. And the one difference is on Pottery, you didn't have, the cattle never had to swim. It was shallow enough. This is the Corpus Christi Bayou right here. It's about 6 or 8 feet. So you'd have to get the cattle to swim across, drive here. And the nice thing about this spot is this is where the factories were, the slaughterhouses. So once you got them there, then they were already at the market. So that saves some time there. That was cattle ranching. But the main transportation to and from the islands was boats. And settlement started on the Aransas side in the 1820s, late 1820s, and in Corpus and Nueces County in the 1838. But all transportation was by boat. Back up one, please. But this is a scow schooner like the Farley Boat Works is working. But there were 2 ways to get on the island. There's the pass right here. This is the Aransas Pass, and then the 3 rail spurs, and this was a very active port. There's the jetties up in the distance right there. Port Aransas went through a building boom because then I buy my great-grandfather, Patrick Dunn, to buy Pottery Island. And Patrick made a deal with him. I'll sell you the island, and I get to keep ranching on it. So I keep the grass, but you can have the beach and those kind of things. So, Colonel Patrick Dunn, to buy PAPHA Island. And Patrick made a deal with him. I'll sell you the island, and I get to keep ranching on it. So I keep the grass, but you can have the beach and those kind of things. So